Kelvin Powers gripped the prison phone, watching brilliant paralegal Stella Cobb frantically shuffle through legal documents on the other side of the glass. "They're moving me to maximum security tomorrow morning," he whispered urgently. "My brother Patrick convinced the warden I'm a flight risk after our bail hearing." Her mahogany fingers trembled as she held up a manila envelope. "Not if this witness finally agrees to testify." The woman who held his heart now held his last chance at freedom. The fluorescent lights above cast harsh shadows across Stella's determined face as her hands shook, opening the manila envelope. Kelvin's steel-gray eyes never left her movements, his heart hammering against his ribs as if trying to break free from the orange jumpsuit that had become his second skin for 18 long months. Maria Thompson finally signed, Stella whispered through the phone, her voice barely audible over the constant hum of the correctional facility. She held up pages of sworn affidavits, her mahogany fingers steady now despite the magnitude of what they contained. "The court reporter from your original trial. She has recordings, Kelvin. Actual recordings of prosecutor Nancy Rice coaching witnesses to lie under oath." Kelvin's breath caught in his throat, and for the first time since his conviction, tears welled in his eyes, not tears of self-pity, but tears of vindication. The man who had built PowerTech Industries from a basement startup into an $800 million empire, the man who had been branded a thief and embezzler by every major news outlet in the country, finally had proof of his innocence. "After everything Patrick did to sabotage this case," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "after he convinced half the business world I was guilty, you still fought for me. Why, Stella? Why risk your career for someone everyone believes is a criminal?" Stella leaned forward, pressing her palm against the glass partition that separated them. The gesture was intimate despite the barrier, her brown eyes blazing with conviction. "This isn't just about you anymore, Kelvin. It stopped being just about you the moment I realized how deep this corruption goes. This is about every innocent person rotting in prison because prosecutors care more about conviction rates than justice. This is about a system that destroys lives to advance careers." Her passion ignited something deep in Kelvin's chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with attraction and everything to do with recognition. Here was a woman who understood that justice wasn't just about legal victory, it was about moral courage. Here was someone who saw past his designer suits and corporate empire to the man who had always tried to do right by his employees, his community, his family. "I need to call Andy Powell immediately," Stella continued, already gathering the documents. "These recordings don't just prove prosecutorial misconduct. They prove active conspiracy to frame you. Nancy Rice didn't just suppress evidence, she manufactured it." Within 20 minutes, Stella had defense attorney Andy Powell on the phone. Within an hour, they were racing toward the courthouse in Andy's Mercedes. The signed affidavits and digital recordings that could change everything secured in a locked briefcase between them. "Judge Harrison will see us in emergency session," Andy announced as he ended another call. "The recordings are that damning, Stella. In 30 years of practicing law, I've never seen anything this clear-cut. Rice didn't just bend the rules, she obliterated them." But even as hope surged through Stella's veins, she couldn't shake the image of Kelvin's face when he mentioned his brother Patrick. The pain there wasn't just about betrayal, it was about a family destroyed by greed and jealousy. Patrick Powers, once Kelvin's closest confidant and PowerTech's chief financial officer, had become his greatest enemy. The man who had shared Kelvin's childhood dreams had ultimately orchestrated his downfall. The emergency hearing took place in Judge Harrison's chambers, a wood-paneled sanctuary where justice often moved more swiftly than in the formal courtroom. Judge Harrison, a stern woman in her 60s with silver hair and piercing blue eyes, listened to the recordings with an expression of growing disgust. Nancy Rice's voice crackled through the speakers, clear and unmistakable. "I don't care what the financial records actually show. The jury needs to believe Powers was stealing from his own company. Can you adjust your testimony to reflect that timeline?" The witness's uncertain response followed. "But that's not what I observed, Miss Rice. The transfers I saw were legitimate business expenses." "Let me worry about what's legitimate," Rice's voice replied coldly. Your job is to testify that you saw suspicious activity. Otherwise, your own tax issues might become a problem. Judge Harrison stopped the recording, her face flushed with anger. In 40 years on the bench, I have never heard such blatant prosecutorial misconduct. Mr. Powell, I'm issuing an immediate stay of Mr. Power's transfer to maximum security. I'm also ordering the district attorney's office to begin an immediate investigation into every case Nancy Rice has prosecuted in the past 5 years. Stella felt her knees go weak with relief. The transfer was stopped. Kelvin would remain at minimum security while his case was reviewed, but more importantly, the truth was finally emerging from the shadows where it had hidden for 18 months. Your Honor, Andy said carefully, given the evidence of actual innocence, we'd like to request immediate release pending a full review of the conviction. Judge Harrison nodded slowly. I'll consider that request after I've reviewed all the evidence. But Mr. Powell, if even half of what's on these recordings is accurate, there's going to be a lot more than one wrongful conviction to overturn. As they left the courthouse that afternoon, Stella felt the weight of months of exhausting research and investigation lifting from her shoulders. But as relief flooded through her, she realized something profound had changed. This case had become more than professional duty. It had become her calling. The paralegal work she had chosen out of financial necessity had revealed itself as her true purpose. Have you ever had someone fight for you when everyone else gave up? Someone who saw your worth when you couldn't see it yourself? Tell me about that person in the comments. Let me know where you're watching from, and subscribe if you're already feeling the incredible bond between Kelvin and Stella. That evening, Stella returned to Millbrook Federal Correctional Institution for what she hoped would be one of her last visits to Kelvin behind bars. The attorney conference room felt different now, charged with hope instead of desperation, filled with possibility instead of dread. When Kelvin entered the room, still in his orange jumpsuit but walking with renewed purpose, Stella felt her heart skip. The man who had carried himself with dignity, even in prison, now radiated something more. Vindication, yes, but also profound gratitude. The transfer stopped, she announced before he could even sit down. Judge Harrison was furious. Nancy Rice is going to face federal charges for obstruction of justice. Kelvin sank into the plastic chair across from her, and for a moment the composed businessman facade cracked completely. He buried his face in his hands, shoulders shaking with the release of months of suppressed emotion. Kelvin, Stella whispered, reaching toward the glass that separated them. It's going to be okay. You're going to be okay. When he looked up, his steel-gray eyes were bright with unshed tears. Stella, I need you to understand something. When I go free, when all this is over, nothing about what I feel for you is going to change. This isn't gratitude talking. This isn't a man clinging to his savior. What's happened between us? It's real. Stella's breath caught in her throat. The professional boundaries she had maintained so carefully for months seemed suddenly fragile, gossamer thin barriers that could dissolve with a single honest word. I know, she whispered back. I know it's real because I feel it too. They sat in silence for a long moment, separated by glass and institutional protocol, but connected by something stronger than physical barriers. The attraction that had been building between them for months was finally acknowledged. But more than that, they had found something deeper: mutual respect, shared values, the kind of love that grew from truly seeing and appreciating another person's character. I have something to tell you, Kelvin said quietly, about why Patrick did this, about why my own brother destroyed our family's legacy to put me in prison. Stella leaned forward, her heart racing. She had suspected there were deeper layers to Patrick's betrayal, but Kelvin had never been ready to discuss them. Patrick was promised an executive position at Meridian Systems, Kelvin continued, PowerTech's biggest competitor. The embezzlement scheme wasn't just about framing me. It was about destroying PowerTech so completely that Meridian could acquire our patents and government contracts for pennies on the dollar. The implications hit Stella like a physical blow. This wasn't just sibling rivalry or financial desperation. This was industrial espionage on a massive scale, using the criminal justice system as a weapon to eliminate business competition. "How long have you known?" she asked. "I suspected from the beginning," Kelvin admitted, "but I couldn't prove it. And honestly, part of me didn't want to believe my own brother could be capable of something so calculated, so cruel." Stella felt anger rising in her chest, not just at Patrick's betrayal, but at the months of suffering Kelvin had endured while protecting his brother's reputation, even facing prison, even losing everything he had built. Kelvin had tried to shield Patrick from public scrutiny. "That's going to change," she said firmly. "Tomorrow, Andy's filing motions that will expose everyone involved in this conspiracy. Patrick, Nancy Rice, and whoever at Meridian Systems orchestrated this whole scheme." "And then what?" Kelvin asked. "When I'm free? When my name is cleared? When the truth comes out? What happens to us?" The question hung in the air between them, laden with months of carefully suppressed longing. What happened when the crisis that brought them together was resolved? What happened when the professional boundaries that justified their connection were no longer necessary? "I guess we find out if what we've built can survive in the real world," Stella said softly. Kelvin placed his palm against the glass, mirroring her gesture from earlier. "Stella Cobb, when I walk out of this place, the first thing I want to do is take you to dinner. Somewhere with tablecloths and wine glasses and food that doesn't come from a cafeteria. Somewhere I can properly thank the woman who gave me back my life." "Just dinner?" Stella asked, a smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "Well," Kelvin said, his own smile breaking through the emotional intensity of the moment, "maybe breakfast too." The promise in those words sent warmth flooding through Stella's entire body. After months of stolen glances and carefully professional conversations, after months of fighting for his freedom while fighting her growing feelings, they were finally acknowledging what had been building between them all along. But even as hope and anticipation filled the small conference room, Stella couldn't shake a nagging concern. Patrick Powers was still out there, still working with Nancy Rice, still presumably connected to the corporate conspiracy that had orchestrated this entire nightmare. And men who were desperate enough to frame an innocent person for felony embezzlement were desperate enough to do much worse. As visiting hours ended and Kelvin was escorted back to his cell, Stella gathered her legal files with trembling hands. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new revelations, new dangers. But tonight, for the first time in months, she would sleep peacefully, knowing that justice was finally within reach. But how did they get here? How did a convicted billionaire and a determined paralegal find themselves fighting not just for justice, but for a love that defied every barrier between them? It started 4 months ago with a meeting that changed everything. The autumn rain drummed against the windows of Millbrook Federal Correctional Institution as Stella Cobb walked through the security checkpoints for the first time. Her leather briefcase, worn but well-maintained, contained everything she knew about Kelvin Powers: newspaper clippings painting him as a greedy corporate criminal, financial records that seemed to prove embezzlement, and a case file that 3 previous attorneys had abandoned as hopeless. At 34, Stella had built a reputation as the paralegal who never gave up. While other legal professionals chased high-profile clients and lucrative settlements, she specialized in the cases others deemed impossible: wrongful convictions, prosecutorial misconduct, systemic failures that destroyed innocent lives. Her modest salary at Morrison & Associates barely covered her mother's mounting medical bills for diabetes treatment. But the work fed her soul in ways corporate law never could. She had chosen paralegal work over law school when her father's sudden death left a family drowning in debt. Every dollar that might have gone toward her legal education instead went toward keeping her mother alive and their small house out of foreclosure. But fate had given her something law school couldn't: an intuitive understanding of how the system failed the powerless, and an unshakable determination to fight for justice. Kelvin Powers sat waiting in the attorney conference room, and Stella's first impression shattered every preconception she had formed. The man across from her bore little resemblance to the arrogant tech mogul portrayed in news coverage. Yes, he was undeniably handsome, steel-gray eyes that seemed to see straight through pretense, dark hair touched with silver at the temples, a strong jawline that spoke of determination even in defeat. But what struck her most was his presence. Even in an orange jumpsuit, even behind prison walls, he carried himself with quiet dignity. "Miss Cobb," he said, rising as she entered. His voice was deep, cultured, but without the condescension she had expected. "Thank you for agreeing to review my case. I know 3 attorneys have already walked away." "They walked away because they were looking for easy victories," Stella replied, settling into the plastic chair across from him. "I specialize in cases that require actual work." Kelvin's lips curved in what might have been a smile. "I appreciate directness, so let me be direct with you. I didn't steal $50 million from PowerTech Industries. I didn't embezzle money meant for employee pensions. I didn't betray the trust of 800 people who built their careers on the company I created in my garage 20 years ago." "Everyone claims they're innocent," Stella said, opening her briefcase and spreading documents across the small table. "What makes you different?" "Because I'm not fighting for my freedom," Kelvin said quietly. "I'm fighting for the truth. When I walk out of here, if I walk out of here, I want those 800 employees to know their faith in me wasn't misplaced. I want the investors who trusted PowerTech to know they backed an honest company. I want my brother to know that family loyalty should never come at the expense of justice." Something in his tone made Stella look up from the financial records. There was pain in his steel-gray eyes, but not self-pity. This was the pain of a man who understood that his reputation affected hundreds of other lives. "Tell me about your brother," she said. Kelvin's expression darkened slightly. "Patrick was my business partner, my closest friend, my only family after our parents died. He was PowerTech's chief financial officer. He had access to every account, every transaction, every financial decision we made. When the FBI raided our offices, when they found evidence of embezzlement, Patrick was the one who confirmed their suspicions about my involvement." "Why would he do that?" "That's what I've been trying to understand for 18 months, Kelvin said. "Patrick always lived in my shadow. I was the visionary, the public face of the company. He was brilliant with numbers, but he never got the recognition he deserved. Maybe resentment finally consumed him. Maybe he genuinely believes I'm guilty. Or maybe," he trailed off, his jaw tightening with some unspoken suspicion. "Maybe what?" Stella pressed. "Maybe someone offered him something more valuable than family loyalty." Stella spent the next 2 hours reviewing financial documents with Kelvin, and gradually, her skepticism began to shift toward curiosity. His knowledge of PowerTech's operations was encyclopedic, but more than that, his genuine concern for employees shone through every explanation. When discussing layoffs that followed his arrest, his voice broke with authentic remorse. "Annie Davison had just bought her first house," he said, pointing to a name on the employee roster. "Single mother, 2 kids, worked her way up from customer service to regional manager over 8 years. When PowerTech's stock collapsed, she lost everything. I know because I liquidated my personal investment portfolio to create an emergency fund for employees facing foreclosure." Stella looked up sharply. "You sold your own investments to help employees?" $12 million, Kelvin confirmed. "My yacht, my art collection, my vacation properties. Everything liquid went into the PowerTech Employee Assistance Fund. I couldn't save their jobs, but I could help them survive until they found new ones." This was not the behavior of a man who had stolen from his own company. Corporate criminals didn't sacrifice personal wealth to protect the people they had betrayed. They didn't speak with genuine anguish about employees losing their homes. "Why isn't this information in your case file?" Stella asked. "My sourced attorney said it would make me look guilty," Kelvin replied, "trying to buy forgiveness with my victims' money. But they weren't my victims, Miss Cobb. They were my responsibility. I built PowerTech to give brilliant people the chance to create something meaningful. When that dream collapsed, I owed them everything I could give." As the afternoon wore on, Stella found herself increasingly drawn to Kelvin's character. Yes, he was undeniably attractive. The kind of man who would have commanded attention in any boardroom or social gathering, but his appeal went deeper than physical attractiveness. Here was someone who had faced complete ruin with grace, who had maintained his integrity even when cooperation might have reduced his sentence, who had put employee welfare above his own legal defense. During their discussion of PowerTech's government contracts, Kelvin's hand accidentally brushed against Stella's as they both reached for the same document. The contact lasted only a moment, but both felt the electric awareness that shot between them. Stella's breath caught slightly, and she noticed Kelvin's pupils dilate before he deliberately pulled his hand back. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "That was inappropriate." "It was an accident," Stella replied, though they both knew it had felt like much more than accidental contact. "Miss Cobb, I need you to understand something," Kelvin said, his voice taking on an urgent quality. "You're too brilliant, too dedicated, too valuable to risk your career on someone like me. 3 attorneys have already walked away from this case because it seemed hopeless. Don't let misplaced compassion or other feelings cloud your professional judgment." Stella felt her heart skip at his obvious concern for her well-being. Even facing life in prison, even desperate for competent legal help, Kelvin was trying to protect her from professional damage. This wasn't manipulation or emotional blackmail. It was genuine care from a man who had already sacrificed everything for others. "Mr. Powers," she said firmly, "I don't make decisions based on compassion. I make them based on evidence, and the evidence tells me you're innocent." "What evidence?" Kelvin asked, leaning forward intently. Stella pulled out a thick folder she had prepared before the meeting. "Financial forensics your previous attorneys apparently never bothered to conduct. The money transfers that supposedly prove embezzlement don't match your digital signature patterns. The timing of the transactions coincides with overseas trips taken by someone else with financial access. Your brother Patrick, and most damning of all, the supposed victim accounts where the money was deposited. They were opened using Patrick's personal information, not yours." Kelvin stared at the documents, his face growing pale. "You're saying Patrick didn't just fail to defend me. You're saying he actively framed me." "I'm saying the evidence points to a level of betrayal that goes beyond family rivalry," Stella confirmed. "This wasn't opportunistic embezzlement. This was systematic, planned, sophisticated financial fraud designed to implicate you while benefiting someone else." The silence that followed was heavy with the weight of ultimate betrayal. Kelvin had suspected his brother's testimony was influenced by resentment or outside pressure. But discovering that Patrick had actively orchestrated his imprisonment was a wound that cut deeper than any physical injury. "Why?" Kelvin whispered. "We built PowerTech together. We shared everything: profits, recognition, success. Why would he destroy me?" "That's what we're going to find out," Stella said with quiet determination. As visiting hours ended and Kelvin was escorted back to his cell, Stella remained in the conference room, staring at the financial documents spread across the table. The case that had seemed hopeless suddenly revealed itself as solvable, difficult, complex, requiring months of meticulous investigation, but ultimately winnable. More troubling was her growing attraction to Kelvin Powers. She had expected to meet a fallen executive grasping for redemption. Instead, she had encountered a man of genuine character whose downfall seemed increasingly like a carefully orchestrated injustice. A man whose concern for her professional welfare outweighed his desperate need for legal help. A man whose touch had sent electricity through her entire body with just an accidental brush of fingers. Over the following weeks, Stella threw herself into the case with an intensity that surprised even her. She spent long nights at Morrison & Associates, poring over financial records, timeline analyses, and digital forensics. She interviewed former PowerTech employees who painted a consistent picture of Kelvin as an ethical leader who prioritized employee welfare over profit margins. The deeper she dug, the more convinced she became of his innocence. But she also discovered something more dangerous than she had anticipated. She was falling for her client. Prison visits that began as purely professional consultations evolved into conversations that revealed the depth of Kelvin's character. He asked about her mother's health, remembered that she preferred her coffee black with 1 sugar, showed genuine interest in her delayed dreams of law school. "You should be practicing law, not supporting lawyers," he told her during one visit. "Your legal instincts are better than most attorneys I've worked with." "Law school requires money I don't have," Stella replied. "My mother's medical bills take everything I earn." When this is over, Kelvin said quietly, when my name is cleared and PowerTech is rebuilt, I want to establish a scholarship fund for working professionals who can't afford legal education. People like you shouldn't have to choose between family duty and professional dreams. It was a generous gesture, but more than that, it showed that Kelvin's transformation wasn't just about surviving prison. He had emerged from this ordeal with a deeper understanding of how the system failed people without resources or connections. He wanted to use his eventual freedom to create opportunities for others. During one particularly intense discussion about the financial evidence, Kelvin leaned forward as he explained a complex transaction pattern. Stella found herself studying the strong line of his jaw, the way his steel-gray eyes lit up when he discussed something he was passionate about, the controlled strength in his hands as he gestured. When he caught her staring, they locked eyes for a long moment, both breathing more heavily than the conversation warranted. "Miss Cobb," Kelvin said softly, "we need to be careful." "About what?" Stella whispered, though she knew exactly what he meant. "About letting personal feelings complicate professional judgment. About getting too close to something that could hurt us both." But even as he spoke the warning, neither of them pulled back from the intensity crackling between them through the glass partition. As weeks turned into months, their connection deepened beyond professional collaboration. They began to share dreams, fears, vulnerabilities that had nothing to do with legal strategy. Kelvin spoke of his plans to rebuild PowerTech as an employee cooperative if he was ever freed. Stella shared her delayed ambitions to fight wrongful convictions in court rather than just in research. "We could work together," Kelvin said one afternoon. "When this is over, when I'm free, we could create a foundation dedicated to overturning wrongful convictions. Your investigative skills, my business resources, working together to fix a broken system." The vision he painted was intoxicating, not just because it promised a future together, but because it represented meaningful work that could help countless innocent people. Stella had found her calling in fighting for justice, and Kelvin offered her the resources to pursue it without financial constraints. But first, they had to prove his innocence, and that meant confronting the devastating truth about Patrick's betrayal. Late one evening, as Stella worked alone in the Morrison and Associates offices, she made a discovery that changed everything. Hidden in the metadata of financial transfer records was evidence that would either free Kelvin or send him to maximum security forever. Her hands trembled as she reached for the phone to call him with news that would shatter his faith in family, but potentially restore his freedom. As the prison phone rang, Stella realized she was about to deliver information that would force Kelvin to choose between protecting his brother and saving himself. The question was, which choice would the man she was falling in love with ultimately make? The late evening call that would change everything came on a Tuesday in November, 2 months after their first meeting. Stella's voice trembled through the prison phone system, and Kelvin immediately knew she had uncovered something significant. "I found it," she whispered, her words barely audible over the constant background noise of the correctional facility. "The smoking gun evidence that proves your innocence. But Kelvin, what I discovered about Patrick, it's going to destroy you." Kelvin gripped the phone tighter, his knuckles white against the black plastic. "Tell me." "Not over the phone," Stella said. "This is too dangerous, too explosive. I'm requesting an emergency meeting with Andy Powell tomorrow morning. We need to discuss this in person, all three of us together." "Stella, please," Kelvin said urgently. "I've been living with suspicions about my brother for 18 months. Whatever you found, I can handle it." There was a long pause before Stella's voice came back, thick with tears. "The overseas transactions, the money transfers, the timing of everything. Patrick didn't just steal from PowerTech, Kelvin. He's been planning this for over 2 years. There are emails, encrypted communications, financial agreements with Meridian Systems. Your brother sold you out for $30 million and a guaranteed executive position at PowerTech's biggest competitor." The words hit Kelvin like physical blows. He had suspected Patrick's betrayal was motivated by resentment or outside pressure, but discovering it was a calculated business transaction transformed family tragedy into something far more sinister. "How long have you known?" Kelvin asked quietly. "I've suspected for weeks," Stella admitted, "but I couldn't prove it until tonight." The digital forensics finally cracked the encryption on Patrick's personal laptop. "Kelvin, this goes beyond embezzlement. This is industrial espionage, corporate warfare using the criminal justice system as a weapon." Kelvin closed his eyes, feeling the last remnants of brotherly love crumble in his chest. The Patrick he had known, the little brother he had taught to code, the business partner he had trusted with everything, the family member he had protected, even while facing prison. That person had never existed. Or if he had existed, he had been consumed by greed years ago. "What do we do now?" Kelvin asked. "We expose everything," Stella said with fierce determination. "Patrick, Nancy Rice, Meridian Systems, everyone involved in this conspiracy. We don't just clear your name, we make sure this never happens to another innocent person." After ending the call, Kelvin returned to his cell with a strange mixture of devastation and relief. The brother who had betrayed him was truly gone, but the woman fighting for his freedom had just handed him the key to vindication. Stella Cobb, the brilliant paralegal who worked tirelessly for a fraction of what corporate attorneys earned, had accomplished what 3 expensive legal teams couldn't. She had found the truth. The next morning's meeting in the attorney conference room crackled with tension and anticipation. Andy Powell, a silver-haired defense attorney with 30 years of experience, listened to Stella's findings with growing amazement. "In 3 decades of practicing law," Andy said, reviewing the encrypted emails, "I've never seen a conspiracy this sophisticated. Patrick didn't just embezzle money, he systematically destroyed PowerTech's reputation, sabotaged government contracts, and fed proprietary information to competitors. This isn't just criminal fraud. This is economic terrorism." Stella spread additional documents across the table. The most damaging evidence is Patrick's correspondence with Meridian Systems executives. They didn't just offer him money and a job, they provided detailed instructions on how to frame Kelvin while making the embezzlement look believable. Kelvin studied the emails with a mixture of professional admiration and personal anguish. Patrick's plan was brilliant in its complexity and devastating in its thoroughness. Every element had been designed not just to steal money, but to destroy Kelvin's reputation so completely that PowerTech could never recover. "He knew I would never sell the company," Kelvin said quietly. "PowerTech was my life's work, my legacy, my gift to employees who believed in innovation over profit margins. The only way Meridian could acquire our patents and government contracts was to destroy me personally." "And he succeeded," Andy pointed out. "PowerTech's stock is worthless, your assets are frozen, your employees have scattered to competitors. Even when we prove your innocence, rebuilding will be nearly impossible." But Kelvin's steel-gray eyes blazed with renewed determination. "Then we don't just rebuild PowerTech, we create something better, something can't be destroyed by family betrayal or corporate espionage." Over the following weeks, as Andy prepared the legal motions that would expose the conspiracy, Stella continued her investigation into the full scope of Patrick's betrayal. Late nights at Morrison & Associates became routine as she traced financial transactions across multiple countries, uncovered encrypted communications, and built an ironclad case for Kelvin's complete exoneration. During this period, their professional relationship evolved into something deeper and more complex. Prison phone calls scheduled during designated hours became the highlights of both their days. What began as legal strategy discussions gradually revealed intimate details about their dreams, fears, and growing feelings for each other. "When I was building PowerTech," Kelvin told her during one evening call, "I thought success meant market dominance and financial growth. Prison taught me that real success means creating something that improves people's lives. When I'm free, I want to rebuild the company as an employee cooperative. Every person who contributes to our success should share in the profits." "That's a beautiful vision," Stella replied. "But what about your personal dreams? What do you want for yourself, not just your company?" There was a long pause before Kelvin answered. "I want to find someone who sees past the corporate empire and the public reputation to the man underneath. Someone who values character over wealth, integrity over status, someone who challenges me to be better than I thought I could be. Stella's heart raced as she realized he was describing her. And if you found that person, I'd spend the rest of my life proving I was worthy of her faith in me. The conversation left both of them breathless with unspoken longing. Through months of professional collaboration, they had developed a connection that transcended attorney-client relationships. But the glass partition separating them, the institutional constraints of the prison system, and the ethical boundaries of legal representation kept their growing feelings carefully contained. During one particularly intense discussion of the evidence against Patrick, Kelvin leaned forward to point out details in a financial document. Stella mirrored his movement, and suddenly their faces were inches apart, separated only by the glass partition. Both froze, staring into each other's eyes, their breathing synchronized and heavy. "Stella," Kelvin whispered, his palm pressed against the glass. She matched his gesture, her hand aligned with his through the barrier. "I know, I feel it too." For a long moment, they remained frozen in that position, hearts racing, bodies responding to an attraction they couldn't act upon. When a guard walked past, they both pulled back reluctantly, the spell broken, but the connection stronger than ever. "We need to be careful," Kelvin said, though his voice lacked conviction. "About what?" Stella asked, echoing their earlier conversation. "About falling in love with someone you can't touch. About building dreams around a man who might spend the rest of his life in prison." "You're not going to spend your life in prison," Stella said, firmly. "The evidence I've found will free you. The question is what happens after that." "What do you want to happen?" Kelvin asked. Stella's answer came without hesitation. "I want to find out if what we've built through phone calls and glass partitions can survive in the real world. I want to discover if the connection we feel is real or just an illusion created by extraordinary circumstances. And if it's real, then maybe we can build something together that's even better than the dreams we've shared separately." As December approached, Andy Powell filed motions that would expose the full conspiracy. But Patrick Powers wasn't passively waiting for legal proceedings to unfold. Through corporate connections and financial resources provided by Meridian Systems, he launched a preemptive campaign to discredit the new evidence. Newspaper articles began appearing that questioned Stella's qualifications and motivations. Anonymous sources suggested she was romantically involved with Kelvin, compromising her professional judgment. Morrison and Associates faced pressure from other clients who worried about being associated with the controversial case. "They're trying to destroy your reputation the same way they destroyed mine," Kelvin told Stella during one of their phone calls. "You should distance yourself from this case before it damages your career permanently." "Are you firing me as your paralegal?" Stella asked. "I'm trying to protect you," Kelvin replied. "You've already done more than enough. You've found evidence that will free me. Let Andy handle the rest." "And abandon you just when you need support most? Never." Stella's voice carried absolute conviction. "I don't care what they say about my motivations or my professional judgment. I know the truth about your innocence, and I'm going to make sure the world knows it too." Her loyalty in the face of professional danger revealed the depth of her feelings more clearly than any romantic declaration. Stella Cobb wasn't just fighting for legal victory. She was fighting for the man she had come to love. But Kelvin's concern for her welfare was equally revealing. Even facing the possibility of maximum security prison, even desperate for competent legal support, he was willing to release her from the case to protect her career. His love for her transcended his own needs. As Christmas approached, Stella made a discovery that would either vindicate them both or destroy any hope of Kelvin's freedom. Hidden in Patrick's encrypted files was a recording that proved prosecutorial misconduct, but also revealed the identity of a witness who could testify to Kelvin's innocence, if that witness could be convinced to come forward. "Maria Thompson," Stella told Kelvin during their next call, "the court reporter from your original trial. She was present during meetings between Patrick and Nancy Rice. She heard them planning your frame-up." "Will she testify?" Kelvin asked. "That's the question," Stella replied. "Maria retired immediately after your trial and moved to Florida. She's been in hiding for 18 months. terrified of retaliation from the people who destroyed you. Convincing her to testify means asking her to risk everything. Then we don't ask. Kelvin said immediately, I won't put another innocent person in danger to save myself. Stella felt her heart break at his selflessness. Even facing life in prison, Kelvin refused to endanger someone else's safety for his own benefit. This was the man she had fallen in love with, someone whose moral compass never wavered, even under extreme pressure. There might be another way, she said, carefully. What if we could guarantee Maria's protection? What if exposing the conspiracy meant she would be safer testifying than remaining silent? The encrypted folder Stella discovered contained something extraordinary. Video recordings of Patrick Powers meeting with Meridian Systems executives, recorded secretly by someone within their organization. But more shocking was the identity of the person who had provided the recordings, Maria Thompson herself. The court reporter hadn't been hiding in fear. She had been gathering evidence. Maria has been working undercover for the FBI, Stella told Kelvin during their next phone call, her voice trembling with excitement. She's been investigating corporate espionage in the tech industry for 2 years. Your case was her way into the conspiracy. Kelvin felt his world shift on its axis. You're saying the FBI knew I was innocent this entire time? They suspected, but they needed Patrick to complete the conspiracy before they could make arrests. Your imprisonment was collateral damage in a larger investigation. The revelation was both liberating and infuriating. Kelvin had spent 18 months in prison while federal agents used his case to build a broader investigation. But Maria's evidence was comprehensive enough to ensure not just his freedom, but the complete destruction of everyone who had betrayed him. Within 24 hours, Andy Powell had filed emergency motions with Judge Harrison. The FBI recordings showed Patrick Powers, Nancy Rice, and 3 Meridian Systems executives planning the systematic destruction of power tech industries. The evidence was so damning that the prosecutor's office immediately began plea negotiations. 2 days later, Kelvin Powers walked out of Millbrook Federal Correctional Institution, a free man. Stella waited by Andy Powell's car, her heart racing as she watched Kelvin emerge from the building in civilian clothes. A charcoal gray suit that emphasized his strong shoulders, his steel gray eyes bright with freedom, and something deeper that made her breath catch. 18 months of seeing him only in orange jumpsuits and prison-issued clothing hadn't prepared her for the impact of seeing him as the man he truly was. Miss Cobb, he said formally as he approached, but his eyes held warmth that made her pulse quicken. Mr. Powers, she replied, matching his professional tone while her heart hammered against her ribs. They stood facing each other in the prison parking lot, suddenly uncertain how to navigate their relationship without glass partitions and institutional constraints. Months of carefully controlled attraction were about to be tested in the real world. I need to ask you something, Kelvin said quietly. Everything between us, everything we shared through phone calls and prison visits, was that real? Or was it just 2 people finding connection in an impossible situation? Stella stepped closer, close enough to catch the scent of his aftershave, close enough to see the flecks of silver in his steel-gray eyes. There's only one way to find out. The ride to Keldon's downtown penthouse was charged with nervous energy. The ankle monitor was gone, the legal constraints had been lifted, but emotional barriers remained. They were no longer paralegal and client. They were 2 people who had fallen in love under extraordinary circumstances, about to discover if their connection could survive an ordinary reality. The penthouse reflected Kelvin's transformed values. Most of his art collection and luxury furnishings had been sold to fund employee assistance. The space was elegant but understated, filled with books instead of status symbols, comfortable furniture instead of designer pieces. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city, but the view seemed less important than the quiet intimacy of the space. It's different than I expected, Stella said, touring the rooms that had once housed a billionaire's lifestyle. Prison changes your perspective on what matters, Kelvin replied. I used to fill this place with expensive things to prove my success. Now, I'd rather fill it with meaningful relationships. They worked together that evening, preparing for the complex appeals process that would formally overturn his conviction. But the legal documents seemed secondary to the electricity crackling between them, every time their hands brushed, every time their eyes met across the dining room table. "Stella," Kelvin said finally, setting down the brief he had been reviewing. "I need you to know something. When I was in prison, you became my connection to hope. Your visits, your phone calls, your absolute faith in my innocence, that kept me alive. But what I feel for you now, in this moment, has nothing to do with gratitude." "What does it have to do with?" she asked softly. "It has to do with the fact that you're the most extraordinary woman I've ever met. Your intelligence, your dedication, your courage in the face of professional danger. You inspire me to be better than I thought I could be." Stella felt warmth flooding her entire body. "Kelvin, I fought for your freedom because I believed in your innocence. But I'm here now because I believe in who you are. Prison didn't break you. It revealed your true character." The confession hung in the air between them, heavy with months of suppressed longing. When Kelvin stood and moved toward her, Stella's heart began racing. When he cupped her face in his hands, she felt herself melting into his touch. "I've wanted to do this for months," he whispered, his thumb tracing the curve of her cheek. "Then do it," she breathed. Their first kiss was tentative, almost reverent, months of longing compressed into a single moment of connection. But as Stella's arms wound around his neck, as Kelvin pulled her closer against his chest, tentative became passionate, reverent became desperate. "Wait," Kelvin said, pulling back suddenly. "I need you to be sure about this. I need you to choose me not because you saved me, but because you want to be with the man I am now." Stella looked into his steel-gray eyes, seeing not the fallen billionaire or the vindicated prisoner, but the man who had maintained his integrity under impossible pressure, the man who had sacrificed his personal wealth to help displaced employees, the man who had tried to protect her career even while facing life in prison. "I choose you," she said firmly. "Not the CEO, not the victim, not the client. I choose Kelvin Powers, the man who taught me that love grows from respect, trust, and shared values." This time when he kissed her, there was no hesitation. Stella felt herself drowning in sensation, the warmth of his mouth, the strength of his arms around her, the scent of his skin as he pressed kisses along her neck. When he lifted her into his arms, carrying her toward the bedroom, she felt safe and desired in equal measure. The master bedroom was as simply furnished as the rest of the penthouse. A king-sized bed with white linens, nightstands holding books instead of gadgets, windows that looked out over the city lights. But as Kelvin set her gently on her feet beside the bed, the simplicity of the space only emphasized the complexity of their emotions. "Are you certain?" he asked, his hands framing her face. "I've never been more certain of anything," Stella replied. What followed was tender exploration of feelings too long suppressed. Kelvin's hands trembled as he slowly removed her blazer, his fingers reverent as they traced the line of her shoulders. His steel-gray eyes searched her face continuously, ensuring every moment was her choice, her desire. "You're so beautiful," he whispered, his voice rough with months of longing. "But your beauty comes from here," he touched her chest gently, "from the courage that never wavered, the heart that never doubted." Stella's fingers found the buttons of his shirt, her touch sending shivers through his entire body. As the fabric fell away, she marveled at the lean strength revealed, not the pampered physique of a billionaire, but the disciplined form of a man who had found inner strength through adversity. "Prison changed you," she murmured, tracing the subtle definition of his chest, feeling his height racing beneath her palm. "You changed me," he corrected, capturing her hand and pressing it more firmly against his heart. "Every phone call, every visit, every moment you believed in me when I couldn't believe in myself." The confession hung between them as he slowly unzipped her skirt, his movements deliberate and worshipful. When the fabric pulled at her feet, Stella felt no self-consciousness, only the certainty that she was exactly where she belonged. "I dreamed of this," Kelvin admitted, his hands spanning her waist, pulling her closer until they were skin to skin. During the longest nights in that cell, I imagined what it would feel like to hold you without barriers, to love you without constraints. And now? Stella asked, her arms encircling his neck, their bodies aligned in perfect harmony. Now I realize my imagination wasn't capable of this reality. He breathed against her lips, before claiming them in a kiss that tasted of freedom and promise. As he guided her toward the bed, every movement was an act of worship. The crisp white sheets became their sanctuary as Kelvin laid her down with infinite care, his eyes drinking in every curve, every line, every detail of the woman who had fought for his freedom and won his heart. Stella, he whispered her name like a prayer as he settled beside her, his hands mapping the silk of her skin. I want to memorize every inch of you, every sound you make, every way you respond to my touch. His lips followed the path his hands had traced, pressing gentle kisses along her collarbone, her shoulder, the sensitive spot where her neck met her ear. Stella's body sang under his attention, every nerve awakening to sensations she had only imagined during their months of separation. Kelvin, she sighed his name as his mouth found the racing pulse at her throat, as his hands discovered places that made her arch against him with need. Tell me what you want, he murmured against her skin. Tell me how to love you. Just like this, she breathed, her fingers threading through his hair as he worshipped her with reverent touches. Tender, slow, like we have forever. We do have forever, he promised, rising to look into her eyes. Whatever happens tomorrow, whatever challenges we face, we have this moment and every moment after. As moonlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting silver patterns across their intertwined bodies, they moved together in a dance as old as time, but unique to them. Every caress was a declaration, every kiss a covenant, every shared breath a promise of devotion. Stella had never felt so cherished, so completely seen and accepted. Kelvin's touch erased every doubt, every fear, every moment of loneliness from the past months. When he whispered her name against her lips, when his body joined with hers in perfect union, she felt complete for the first time in her life. I love you, she breathed as they moved together, their rhythm as natural as breathing, as inevitable as dawn. I love you too, he replied, his voice breaking with emotion. More than freedom, more than vindication, more than anything I thought I wanted. Their connection transcended the physical, becoming something spiritual, transformative. In Kelvin's arms, Stella discovered depths of passion she hadn't known existed. In Stella's embrace, Kelvin found healing for wounds he hadn't realized he carried. As their movements became more urgent, more desperate, they held each other's gaze, sharing not just their bodies but their souls. When release finally claimed them, it was simultaneous, overwhelming, a crescendo that left them trembling and complete. Afterward, they lay entwined in the darkness, hearts still racing, skin still humming with the afterglow of perfect union. Kelvin pulled the sheet over them both, creating a cocoon of warmth and intimacy. That was, Stella began, then trailed off, unable to find words adequate to describe what they had shared. Perfect, Kelvin finished, pressing a gentle kiss to her temple. Worth waiting 18 months for. Worth waiting a lifetime for, she corrected, nestling closer to his warmth. Stella traced lazy patterns on Kelvin's chest, while he played with the soft strands of her hair, both reluctant to break the spell of intimacy that surrounded them. What are you thinking about? He asked softly, noting the contemplative expression on her face. I'm thinking about how this feels like coming home, she admitted. Like every choice I made, every struggle I faced, was leading me to this moment, to you. Kelvin shifted to face her fully, his hand cupping her cheek with infinite tenderness. You saved more than my freedom, Stella. You saved my faith in goodness, in justice, in the possibility that love could grow even in the darkest circumstances. We saved each other, she corrected, leaning into his touch. I was drowning in my mother's medical bills, in cases that seemed hopeless, in dreams I thought I'd never achieve. You gave me purpose. Showed me that fighting for justice wasn't just a job, it was my calling. They made love again as dawn approached, this time with the confidence of two people who had chosen each other completely. There was no urgency now, No desperation born of months of separation. Instead, there was joy, celebration, the pure happiness of two souls who had found their perfect match. "I could stay in this bed forever," Stella murmured, as golden light began filtering through the windows. "So could I," Kelvin agreed, pressing kisses along her shoulder. "But we have a life to build together. The foundation, the employee cooperative, the scholarship fund, all the dreams we shared during those prison phone calls. And us," Stella added, her fingers tracing the strong line of his jaw. "Don't forget about building us." "Never," he promised, capturing her lips in a kiss that tasted of coffee and morning light and infinite possibility. "What happens now?" she asked softly. "Now we build something together," Kelvin replied. "The foundation we talked about, the employee cooperative, the scholarship fund, all of it. But first we build us." "And if the world tries to tear us apart again?" Kelvin tightened his arms around her. "Then we remind ourselves that what we have is worth fighting for. That love based on character and choice is stronger than any external pressure." They spent the night talking about their dreams, their fears, their plans for a future neither had dared hope for during the dark months of imprisonment and investigation. As dawn approached, they made love again, this time with the confidence of two people who had chosen each other completely. The morning brought fresh challenges that would test everything they had built together. As they shared breakfast in the penthouse kitchen, Kelvin cooking eggs while Stella prepared fresh coffee, both marveling at the domestic intimacy that felt so natural, the phone rang with news that shattered their peaceful bubble. Warden Thomas Rain's voice carried worry even through the digital connection. "Kelvin, your brother Patrick has requested an emergency meeting with you. He claims he has information that could affect the federal investigation, but he'll only speak to you directly." Stella watched Kelvin's expression darken, saw the muscle in his jaw tighten as he processed the request. The brother who had betrayed him for $30 million, who had orchestrated 18 months of imprisonment and humiliation, wanted to meet face to face. "You don't have to see him," Stella said after Kelvin ended the call, her hand finding his across the kitchen counter. "You owe him nothing." "Yes, I do," Kelvin replied, his steel-gray eyes reflecting pain and determination in equal measure. "Not for his sake, but for mine. I need to understand how the brother I loved, the man I trusted with everything, became someone capable of destroying our family legacy for money." Stella felt a chill of apprehension, though she couldn't articulate why. Patrick had already confessed through the FBI recordings, already been exposed as the architect of Kelvin's destruction. What more could he possibly have to say? "Something feels wrong about this," she said, voicing her concerns. "Why now? Why request a meeting after everything's been exposed?" "Maybe he wants to apologize," Kelvin suggested, though his tone carried no conviction. "Maybe he wants to explain his motivations before the trials begin. Or maybe he wants to make one final attempt to manipulate the situation," Stella countered. "Patrick has proven he's capable of anything when his freedom is threatened." But Kelvin's sense of family obligation, even to a brother who had betrayed him, wouldn't be swayed. They arranged to meet Patrick at the minimum security facility where he was being held pending federal charges. As they prepared to leave the penthouse, Stella felt a nagging worry she couldn't shake. The man who had orchestrated such an elaborate conspiracy wasn't likely to surrender without one final gambit. And this time, both she and Kelvin would be vulnerable, their happiness making them targets for someone with nothing left to lose. The phone call came from an unknown number just as they were walking toward the elevator. Stella answered cautiously, expecting another reporter seeking comment on the case's developments. Instead, she heard Patrick Power's voice, cold and menacing in a way that made her blood freeze. "If my brother shows up for our meeting today, you'll both discover that some secrets are worth killing for. This conspiracy goes deeper than anyone realizes, and there are people who will do anything to keep it buried." The line went dead, leaving Stella staring at her phone in shock. Patrick wasn't seeking reconciliation or offering apologies. He was issuing a death threat, warning them that their lives were in danger if they pursued the truth any further. But what truth? What secret could be so dangerous that Patrick's co-conspirators were willing to commit murder to protect it? Stella's hand shook as she stared at her phone, Patrick's menacing words echoing in her mind. The happiness she had felt just moments before, the perfect morning after their night of complete union, evaporated like mist in the face of real danger. "What did he say?" Kelvin asked, immediately reading the fear in her expression. Stella repeated Patrick's threat word for word, watching as Kelvin's steel-gray eyes hardened with a mixture of fury and protective instinct. The man who had maintained remarkable composure throughout 18 months of imprisonment was finally seeing his brother's true nature without any remaining illusions. "He's bluffing," Kelvin said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Patrick is desperate, facing federal charges, trying to scare us away from pursuing the truth." "What if he's not bluffing?" Stella countered. "What if there really is something deeper, something worth killing for?" "The conspiracy we've uncovered involved $50 million and multiple corporations. Men have been murdered for far less." Kelvin pulled her into his arms, his embrace both protective and desperate. "Then we don't go to the meeting. We stay here, we let the FBI handle Patrick, and we build our life together, without looking back." But even as he spoke the words, they both knew it wasn't that simple. Patrick had specifically mentioned secrets that went deeper than anyone realized. If there were other innocent people at risk, if the conspiracy extended beyond what they had already exposed, could they really walk away? "We need to call Andy Powell," Stella said, "and we need to contact the FBI. If Patrick is threatening us, they need to know." Within an hour, Andy Powell was at the penthouse, accompanied by FBI agent Annie Davison, who had been leading the federal investigation into the PowerTech conspiracy. Agent Davison was a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s who listened to Patrick's recorded threat with growing concern. "This changes everything," Agent Davison said after hearing the recording. "Patrick Powers has been cooperating with our investigation in exchange for a reduced sentence. If he's now threatening witnesses, it suggests he's either been lying to us or there are elements of this conspiracy we haven't uncovered." "What kind of elements?" Kelvin asked. "The kind that involve national security," Agent Davison replied grimly. PowerTech's government contracts included classified defense projects. If foreign governments or terrorist organizations were involved in the conspiracy, Patrick might be trying to protect secrets that could get him killed in federal prison. The implications hit Stella like a physical blow. They weren't just dealing with corporate espionage anymore. They were potentially caught in the middle of an international conspiracy involving state secrets and national security. The stakes had escalated far beyond financial fraud. "So what do we do?" Stella asked. "Hide for the rest of our lives? Let Patrick's threats control our future?" "We proceed carefully," Agent Davison said, "but we don't let threats silence the truth. The meeting Patrick requested is obviously a trap, but we might be able to turn it to our advantage." Over the next several hours, they developed a plan that would allow Kelvin to meet with Patrick while ensuring both their safety. The FBI would monitor the conversation, Stella would remain at a secure location, and federal agents would be positioned to intervene if Patrick attempted anything dangerous. But as they prepared for the confrontation, external pressures began mounting from unexpected directions. News outlets, apparently fed information by Patrick's legal team, began running stories questioning Stella's motivations and professional ethics. "Paralegal's romance compromises high-profile case," read the headline in the morning paper. The article suggested that Stella's relationship with Kelvin had developed during his imprisonment, raising questions about professional boundaries and potentially criminal behavior. "They're trying to destroy your reputation the same way they destroyed mine," Kelvin said, his voice tight with anger as he read the accusations. "Making you look like a corrupt legal professional who fell for her client." "Let them," Stella replied, though the attacks stunned deeply. "We know the truth about when our relationship began, about how we maintained professional boundaries throughout your case. I won't let their lies make me ashamed of loving you." But the media campaign was having its intended effect. Morrison and Associates received calls from other clients expressing concern about being associated with the controversial case. Senior partners pressured Stella to distance herself from Kelvin to protect the firm's reputation. "Take a leave of absence," advised Richard Morrison, the firm's founding partner, during an uncomfortable meeting in his corner office. "Let this media storm pass. Let the federal investigation conclude. then return when the spotlight has moved on. You're asking me to abandon the most important case of my career, Stella replied. The case that exposed massive prosecutorial misconduct and corporate conspiracy. The case that freed an innocent man and will prevent this from happening to other people. I'm asking you to protect your future, Morrison countered. Your career, your reputation, your ability to help other clients. Don't let personal feelings destroy everything you've worked to build. The pressure was immense, coming from every direction. Professional colleagues who had once respected her work now questioned her judgment. Law enforcement officials worried about compromised investigations. Media outlets painted her as either a naive romantic or a corrupt professional. But the most painful pressure came from an unexpected source, her own mother. Dorothy Cobb called that evening, her voice weak but determined. At 68, battling diabetes and mounting medical bills, she had always been Stella's strongest supporter. But the news coverage had reached her small hometown, bringing unwanted attention and gossip. Stella, honey, her mother said carefully, I'm worried about you. This man you're involved with, all these dangerous people threatening you. Maybe it's time to step back. Let someone else handle this case. Mom, I can't just walk away. Stella replied. Kelvin is innocent. The people who framed him are still out there, still dangerous. If I don't see this through, who will? But at what cost? Dorothy asked. Your career? Your safety? Maybe your life? I didn't sacrifice everything to put you through school, just to watch you throw it all away for a man you barely know. The accusation stung because it echoed Stella's own deepest fears. Had she let personal feelings cloud her professional judgment? Had her attraction to Kelvin influenced her investigation of his case? Was she risking everything she had worked for based on emotions rather than evidence? That night, as she lay in Kelvin's arms in the penthouse bedroom, Stella voiced her doubts for the first time. What if they're right? She whispered in the darkness. What if I did let personal feelings compromise my professional ethics? What if everything we've discovered is tainted by our relationship? Kelvin tightened his arms around her, his voice fierce with conviction. Stella, you found evidence that 3 experienced attorneys missed. You uncovered a conspiracy that the FBI had been investigating for 2 years. You exposed prosecutorial misconduct that will free other innocent people. None of that happened because of personal feelings. It happened because you're brilliant, dedicated, and incorruptible. But the timing, Stella continued, the way we fell for each other during the investigation, how do we prove that didn't influence the outcome? We prove it by showing that every piece of evidence stands on its own merit, Kelvin replied. The financial forensics, the encrypted communications, the FBI recordings, none of that was influenced by emotion. It was solid investigative work that would have led to the same conclusions regardless of who conducted it. But even Kelvin's reassurance couldn't completely quiet Stella's doubts. The media attacks, professional pressure, and family concerns had planted seeds of uncertainty that grew stronger with each passing hour. The next morning brought even more troubling news. Agent Davison called to inform them that Patrick Powers had been attacked in federal custody. He was hospitalized with serious injuries, claiming that inmates working for his co-conspirators had tried to silence him permanently. Is he telling the truth? Stella asked. We don't know, Agent Davison admitted. It could be a genuine attack by people trying to prevent his testimony. Or it could be self-inflicted, a desperate attempt to gain sympathy and protective custody. With Patrick, we can't rule out either possibility. The attack, real or staged, had delayed the planned meeting indefinitely. Patrick was in intensive care, unable to speak, his condition critical. If he had been trying to warn them about deeper dangers, that warning might die with him. This is getting too dangerous, Stella told Kelvin that afternoon as they reviewed the latest developments. People are being attacked, threats are escalating, and we're caught in the middle of something we don't fully understand. So what are you saying? Kelvin asked, though his expression suggested he already knew. I'm saying maybe we should step back. Let the FBI handle the investigation. Let the courts process the evidence we've already uncovered, and focus on building our life together away from all this chaos. It was the first time Stella had suggested retreat. and Kelvin could see the toll the pressure was taking. The woman who had fought fearlessly for his freedom was finally showing cracks under the sustained assault on her reputation and safety. "If that's what you want," he said carefully, "if you need to protect yourself and your career, I'll understand. You've already done more than anyone could have expected." But his willingness to release her from the case only made Stella feel worse. Here was a man who had faced 18 months in prison with dignity, who had maintained his innocence despite overwhelming pressure to plea bargain, who had worried more about her career than his own freedom. How could she abandon him now, when external forces were trying to destroy them both? "I don't want to step back," she said finally. "I want to see this through to the end, to make sure every person involved in this conspiracy faces justice. But I'm scared, Kelvin. I'm scared of what we might uncover, scared of who else might get hurt, scared of losing everything we've found together. Have you ever had someone willing to risk everything for you? That kind of loyalty is precious and rare. What do you think about Stella's choice to stand by Kelvin despite the professional danger? Share your thoughts in the comments." "Then we face it together," Kelvin said, pulling her into his arms. "Whatever comes next, whatever dangers we uncover, whatever prices we pay, we face them as a team, because what we have is worth fighting for." That evening, as they worked late into the night reviewing case files and FBI reports, Stella made a discovery that changed everything. Hidden in the metadata of Patrick's communications was evidence of a payment from a source they hadn't considered: a foreign defense contractor with ties to classified government projects. "Kelvin," she said, her voice tight with excitement and fear, "I think I know what secret Patrick was trying to protect. And if I'm right, this conspiracy doesn't just involve corporate espionage, it involves treason." The documents she had uncovered showed payments from Volkov Industries, a Russian defense contractor, to accounts controlled by Patrick Powers. The timing coincided with PowerTech's work on classified military encryption projects. If foreign agents had gained access to American defense secrets through the conspiracy that framed Kelvin, the implications went far beyond financial fraud. "We need to call Agent Davison immediately," Kelvin said, but as he reached for his phone, the lights in the penthouse suddenly went out. Emergency lighting kicked in, casting eerie shadows throughout the apartment. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, they could see that the power outage affected only their building. The rest of the city blazed with normal illumination. "This isn't a coincidence," Stella whispered. Heavy footsteps echoed in the hallway outside, accompanied by voices speaking in a language that sounded distinctly Russian. Someone had cut the power to the building, and they were no longer alone. Kelvin grabbed Stella's hand, pulling her toward the bedroom where his phone was charging. But as they moved through the darkened apartment, they heard the distinctive sound of the penthouse elevator arriving at their floor. The doors opened with a soft chime, and armed figures stepped into the hallway. Patrick's warning had been accurate. There were secrets worth killing for, and the people willing to commit murder had found them. Kelvin's training from his college years on the wrestling team kicked in as he assessed their situation with deadly calm. The penthouse had only one entrance through the elevator, but the floor-to-ceiling windows opened onto a terrace that connected to the building's fire escape. Their only chance was reaching his bedroom, where he kept emergency supplies and a gun he had legally acquired after his release from prison. "Stay behind me," he whispered to Stella, his hand finding hers in the darkness. "We're going to move slowly toward the bedroom. Don't make any sudden movements. Don't speak unless I tell you to." Stella's heart hammered against her ribs as they crept through the darkened penthouse. The emergency lighting cast everything in an eerie red glow, turning familiar furniture into menacing shadows. Through the walls, she could hear heavy footsteps and muffled Russian voices discussing search patterns and potential escape routes. They had almost reached the bedroom when Kelvin's phone rang, the sound echoing through the apartment like a gunshot. Both froze as the voices in the hallway fell silent, then erupted in rapid Russian, followed by the sound of running feet. "Move!" Kelvin shouted, abandoning stealth for speed. They burst into the bedroom just as the penthouse's front door exploded inward. Kelvin grabbed the pistol from his nightstand, while Stella snatched her phone and the case files containing the evidence of Russian payments. Whatever happened next, that evidence had to survive. "Window," Kelvin ordered, firing 2 shots toward the bedroom door to buy them time. The sound was deafening in the enclosed space, but it had the desired effect. Their pursuers took cover instead of rushing forward. Stella struggled with the window latch as boots thundered down the hallway. The mechanism seemed impossibly complex under pressure, her fingers slipping on the metal as adrenaline flooded her system. Behind them, voices shouted commands in Russian and English. "Got it," Stella gasped, as the window finally opened, revealing the terrace and fire escape beyond. They climbed through just as armed figures filled the bedroom doorway. Kelvin fired again, forcing them back, then followed Stella onto the terrace. The night air was shockingly cold after the warmth of the apartment, and the city lights seemed impossibly far below. "Down the fire escape," Kelvin said, but as they reached the metal stairway, more figures appeared on the terrace of the apartment below. They were trapped between armed men above and below, with nothing but a 30-story drop to the street. "This way," Stella said, remembering the building's layout from their previous visits. The penthouse terrace connected to the roof access, and from there, they might reach adjacent buildings or find better defensive positions. They climbed rather than descended, pulling themselves up the metal ladder that led to the building's roof. Behind them, their pursuers hesitated. The roof offered no escape routes, seemingly trapping their targets in a dead end. But Stella's memory proved accurate. The roof contained not only HVAC equipment and satellite dishes, but also a helicopter landing pad that Kelvin had installed during his billionaire years. More importantly, it offered sight lines to neighboring buildings and cell phone reception that had been blocked inside the penthouse. "FBI," Stella gasped into her phone as soon as she got a signal. "Agent Davison, this is Stella Cobb. We're under attack at Kelvin's penthouse. Armed Russians, possibly Volkov Industries operatives. We have evidence of treason-level conspiracy." The response was immediate and reassuring. "SWAT teams are already en route to your location. We've been monitoring communications that suggested an attack was imminent. Get to the northwest corner of the roof and stay down." As they crawled toward the specified location, using HVAC units for cover, Kelvin's mind raced through the implications of what they had discovered. The conspiracy that had framed him wasn't just about covert espionage. It was about selling American military secrets to foreign governments. Patrick hadn't just betrayed his brother. He had betrayed his country. "The payments from Volkov Industries," he said to Stella, as they huddled behind a large air conditioning unit. "Those weren't just bribes for corporate information. They were payments for classified defense encryption protocols that PowerTech developed for the Pentagon, which means Patrick had access to state secrets," Stella realized. And when the FBI investigation threatened to expose the Russian connection, Volkov decided to eliminate anyone who could testify against them. The sound of helicopters approaching from multiple directions filled the night air. But before relief could set in, new figures appeared on the roof. Not their Russian pursuers, but FBI tactical teams rappelling from helicopters, assault rifles trained on defensive positions. Federal agents, came the amplified voice. "Drop any weapons and show your hands." Kelvin immediately placed his pistol on the roof and raised his hands. Stella followed suit, clutching the case files that contained evidence of the international conspiracy. Within minutes, they were surrounded by federal agents in tactical gear, their situation finally secure. But the night's revelations were far from over. Agent Davison arrived via helicopter 20 minutes later, her expression grim as she reviewed the evidence Stella had saved. The documents proved that Patrick Powers had been selling classified military encryption codes to Volkov Industries for over 2 years, generating millions in illegal payments while systematically weakening American cybersecurity. "This is worse than we thought," Agent Davison said. "The encryption protocols Patrick sold were used to protect military communications in 3 different conflict zones. If foreign governments gained access to those codes, American soldiers died because of your brother's treason." Kelvin felt the weight of ultimate betrayal settle on his shoulders. Patrick hadn't just destroyed PowerTech and framed his brother. He had gotten American service members killed for money. The brother he had loved, trusted, and protected was not just a corporate criminal, but a traitor whose actions had cost lives. "Where is Patrick now?" Kelvin asked. "That's complicated," Agent Davison replied. "The attack at the federal facility wasn't staged. Patrick was genuinely assaulted by inmates working for Volkov Industries, but he survived, and he's been asking to speak with you specifically. He claims he has information that could save both your lives." "It's obviously a trap," Stella said immediately. "Patrick has lied about everything else. Why would we trust him now?" "Because," Agent Davison said carefully, "the Volkov operatives who attacked you tonight were just the advance team. Intelligence suggests a much larger operation is planned, targeting not just you and Stella, but potentially other witnesses, FBI agents, and federal prosecutors involved in this case. Patrick claims he knows when and where the next attack will occur." The choice was impossible. Trust the brother who had orchestrated 18 months of imprisonment and betrayed national secrets for personal gain. Or ignore potentially life-saving intelligence and hope the FBI could protect everyone without Patrick's help. "I'll meet with him," Kelvin said finally, "but not alone, and not without guarantees of security." "And I'm going with you," Stella added, ignoring Kelvin's immediate protest. "We've faced everything else together. We're not separating now." The meeting was arranged for the following morning at a secure FBI facility outside the city. Patrick Powers, heavily bandaged and under maximum security protection, looked nothing like the confident corporate executive who had once stood beside Kelvin at PowerTech board meetings. Prison had aged him dramatically, but the attack had done worse. His left arm was in a cast, his face bore multiple stitches, and his eyes held the haunted look of a man who finally understood the consequences of his choices. "Kelvin," Patrick said, as his brother entered the secure conference room, his voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you for coming. I wasn't sure you would." "I'm not here for you," Kelvin replied coldly. "I'm here for the people whose lives are still in danger because of what you've done." Patrick flinched at the harsh words, but nodded acceptance. "I deserve worse than that. But right now, the only thing that matters is stopping Volkov Industries from killing more innocent people." "So talk," Stella said, her paralegal training keeping her focused on extracting useful information rather than expressing moral judgment. "What do you know about their next operation?" "They're planning to eliminate everyone connected to the PowerTech investigation," Patrick said. "Not just witnesses and federal agents, but family members, legal professionals, anyone who could potentially testify or investigate further. The attack on your penthouse was just the beginning." "When?" Agent Davison asked. "Tonight," Patrick replied. "They're moving fast because they know the FBI is closing in. Multiple strike teams, coordinated attacks, designed to look like accidents or random violence. Stella, they know about your mother in Ohio. Kelvin, they know about Andy Powell's family. They know about Agent Davison's children." The scope of the planned violence was staggering. Volkov Industries wasn't just trying to silence specific witnesses. They were attempting to decapitate the entire investigation through systematic assassination. "How do we stop them?" Kelvin asked. "I have the operational details," Patrick said. "Communication frequencies, target locations, timing, personnel assignments, everything I gathered during 2 years of working with them. But I'll only provide that information in exchange for protection for myself and for forgiveness from you." The request for forgiveness hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Patrick had committed treason, had American soldiers killed, destroyed his brother's life, and now he wanted absolution as payment for information that could save lives. "You don't get to negotiate forgiveness," Kelvin said, his voice ice cold. "You don't get to hold innocent lives hostage for your own emotional needs. If you have information that can save people, you provide it because it's the right thing to do, not because you want me to tell you it's okay that you betrayed our country." Patrick's face crumpled with the weight of his brother's judgment. For the first time since childhood, he looked truly small and vulnerable, stripped of the corporate power and financial resources that had shielded him from consequences. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, he said quietly. I know what I've done is unforgivable. But I need you to understand why I did it, why I let greed and resentment consume everything good in me. I don't care why you did it, Kelvin replied. I care about stopping the people you've enabled from killing more innocent victims. But Stella, despite her anger and fear, recognized that understanding Patrick's motivations might be crucial to anticipating future threats. Tell us why, she said. Not for forgiveness, but for information. What drove you to betray everything you claim to believe in? Patrick looked at her gratefully, then turned back to his brother. It started with jealousy. You were always the visionary, the public face of power tech, the brother everyone admired. I was brilliant with numbers, but I was invisible. When Volkov Industries approached me 3 years ago, they didn't want me to spy for them. They wanted me to feel important, valued, appreciated for my unique contributions. So you sold out your country for validation? Kelvin asked incredulously. I sold out my country because I convinced myself that you had never valued my contributions. Patrick said, every success PowerTech achieved, every innovation we developed, every contract we won, it was always credited to your leadership, your vision, your genius. I told myself I was just taking what I deserved. And when people started dying because of the classified information you sold, Patrick's voice broke completely. I told myself that was someone else's responsibility, that I was just providing technical data, not making military decisions. I compartmentalized the consequences, refused to acknowledge that my actions had real-world costs. By the time I understood what I had really done, I was in too deep to stop. The confession revealed the psychology of treason, not dramatic ideological conversion, but gradual moral compromise driven by personal grievances and willful blindness to consequences. Patrick had betrayed his country, not for political beliefs, but for money and recognition. The operational details, Agent Davison pressed. We need them now if we're going to prevent tonight's attacks. Patrick provided everything: communication frequencies, target addresses, timing schedules, personnel descriptions. The information was comprehensive and appeared genuine, but it also revealed the true scope of Volkov Industries' reach into American intelligence networks. There's one more thing, Patrick said as FBI agents prepared to coordinate the defensive response. The person who recruited me, who's been running this entire operation from the American side, it's not who you think it is. What do you mean? Stella asked. I mean the Volkov Industries operation has been managed by someone inside the American government. Someone with access to classified information, federal investigation details, and the ability to coordinate attacks on FBI facilities and federal witnesses. The implication was staggering. The conspiracy didn't just involve corporate espionage and foreign agents. It involved a high-level American government official who had been working as a Russian asset for years. Who? Agent Davison demanded. Patrick looked directly at her, his expression filled with genuine fear. I don't know their real identity. I only knew them by code name. But Agent Davison, they know everything about this investigation, everything about FBI operations, everything about your personal life and your children's schools. The silence that followed was deathly. If a high-level government official was working for Volkov Industries, then every aspect of the federal investigation had been compromised from the beginning. Every safe house, every protective detail, every operational plan could be known to their enemies. We need to assume this entire facility is compromised, Agent Davison said quietly. We need to evacuate all witnesses and federal personnel immediately. And we need to do it without using normal FBI communication channels. But as they prepared to implement emergency protocols, alarms began sounding throughout the federal facility. Red lights flashed in the corridors, and loudspeakers announced a security breach in progress. The Volkov Industries strike teams hadn't waited for nightfall. They were attacking the federal facility in broad daylight, and someone inside the American government was providing them with real-time intelligence about defensive positions and evacuation routes. As armed figures in tactical gear stormed through the facility's corridors, Kelvin grabbed Stella's hand and prepared for what might be their final confrontation with the conspiracy that had already cost so many lives. The question was no longer whether they would survive the day, but whether anyone connected to the PowerTech investigation would live long enough to expose the truth about American government officials working as foreign agents. The federal facility's emergency lockdown protocols activated as armed figures breached the perimeter, but Kelvin could see the futility of standard defensive measures when the enemy had inside information about every security system. Agent Davison barked orders into her radio, coordinating evacuation routes, but her voice carried the tension of someone who knew their communications might be compromised. "We need to get Patrick to a secure location," she said. But even as she spoke, they could hear gunfire echoing through the corridors. The Volkov operatives weren't just trying to silence witnesses. They were attempting to eliminate everyone connected to the investigation, including federal agents and government personnel. "The old fallback shelter," Patrick said suddenly, his voice urgent despite his injuries. "Building C, sub-basement level. It was designed during the Cold War for exactly this kind of scenario. Foreign agents attacking federal facilities. The entrance is through the medical wing, behind the MRI equipment." Agent Davison looked skeptical. "How do you know about classified facility layouts?" "Because the government mole who recruited me provided building schematics as proof of their access level," Patrick replied. "They wanted to demonstrate that they could protect me from federal prosecution by controlling investigations from the inside." The revelation that Patrick knew the identity of the government traitor sent shockwaves through the group. If he could identify the mole, they could potentially save not just themselves, but every other person targeted for assassination. "Who is it?" Kelvin demanded. "Who in the government has been working for Volkov Industries?" But before Patrick could answer, the conference room door exploded inward as a flashbang grenade detonated, filling the space with blinding light and deafening sound. Through the chaos, black-clad figures with assault rifles poured into the room, their movements coordinated and professional. Kelvin threw himself over Stella, shielding her from the blast effects while his ears rang from the explosion. Agent Davison drew her sidearm, but the tactical disadvantage was overwhelming. They were trapped in a small room against multiple armed assailants with superior equipment and positioning. "Everyone down," shouted a voice with a distinct Russian accent. "Hands visible. No sudden movements or we start shooting hostages." As his vision cleared, Kelvin could see that the operatives weren't just interested in killing them quickly. They wanted information, which meant interrogation, which meant they might have precious time to find escape opportunities, or for federal reinforcements to arrive. "What do you want?" Agent Davison asked. Her voice steadied despite their desperate situation. "We want the evidence," the lead operative replied, his English precise but accented. "All documents, all recordings, all proof of Volkov Industries' involvement in American operations. And we want the names of everyone who has seen that evidence." Stella clutched the case files tighter, realizing that the documents she had saved contained not just proof of the conspiracy, but potentially the names and locations of other witnesses who would be murdered if this information fell into enemy hands. The evidence was transmitted to multiple FBI offices. She